Well, this might not age well. So video game companies sure do hate making money, don't they? They'll own the rights to thousands of games and sit on 75% of them, even if there would otherwise be no problems re-releasing a lot of them, like licensing issues and whatnot. But just because some games don't get re-releases doesn't mean you have to resort to piracy. If you have the hardware to play a game on, you can still buy the game and play it that way. Sometimes. It's way tougher to get that luxury with arcade games though. Arcade boards are way harder to find for specific obscure games because of their inherent scarcity and are extremely expensive, and this still applies even if you're dealing with arcade systems with interchangeable games. It's clearly not worth it for people who just merely want to play certain games, and if an arcade game has never received any kind of official port or conversion, then your best option is to sail the seven seas. And today I wanted to talk about a few arcade games that haven't seen re-releases that I've just been wanting to talk about. Now I could go on about this forever, as there are just so many arcade games that have never seen any kind of official home release. But for this video, I'm just sticking to 3 games. This video isn't meant to be a broad discussion about piracy in arcade games or anything. I just wanted to talk about these games that all had this issue of not seeing any home releases in common. The first ones I want to talk about are 2 games from a Japanese company called Kaneko. Now, if you've never heard of Kaneko, I can't blame you, as they're probably best known for the terrible Chester Cheetah games and Gal's Panic, aka the Kix clones with nipples. They're also pretty well known for their shoot-em-ups, the most notable of which is probably Airbuster or Aeroblasters, but they also made other notable ones for the PC Engine. But personally, I prefer their arcade stuff. I'm not a big fan of Super Star Soldier or Nexar, despite being big fans of the games they're connected to. I mean, the first section of Super Star Soldier says it all. Why do the power-up pickups look almost exactly like the enemies? That's just blatantly bad design. I do enjoy their game Star Parodier though, the parody Star Soldier spin-off in which you can play as Bomberman or an anthropomorphic PC Engine. If you're a Bomberman fan, you owe it to yourself to play that game, by the way. It's awesome. But the first of these 2 Kaneko arcade games I want to talk about is a game called Bakuretsu Breaker or Explosive Breaker, first released to arcades internationally in October of 1992. This game's just weird. I think it represents something not a lot of people talk about when it comes to late 1980s and early 1990s video games. With the increasing graphical fidelity of video games, I think for a lot of developers, it was actually kind of difficult to create a cohesive vision, and very few games could pull it off. I think this was especially true of arcade games, since nobody was going to be able to take them home and pick them apart, and with the cheap nature of a lot of arcade games, there was kind of no incentive to care about making a game feel thematically cohesive. I feel like the rare arcade games that did feel super cohesive don't get enough praise for that aspect, because honestly, they ended up being the exception a lot of the time. Out of every arcade game released in this time period though, this one might actually take the cake in terms of feeling the most like the developers went, okay, we have a bunch of unused art assets, let's just throw them all into one game. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. It's just a weird game. The game opens on a boss fight that just ends. One of the first things you face seems to be an unanimated image of a regular helicopter in space. Every character has their own unique and creatively designed bombs. One of them is a lizard named Hans. There's this guy's face. It's a weird game, but in a unique way because it's not really in your face about it. In terms of how it plays though, it's alright. You got 6 different characters who all play differently, co-op, instant respawns making the game easy to play casually, though my one big complaint is that there is no auto fire. Another thing that may be a pro to some people, may be a con for others, is that the game is fairly short, even for a shoot 'em up, only being around 15 minutes in length and has a pretty underwhelming ending. But the things you face in the first level seem to be randomized, so You really need multiple playthroughs to fully soak in how weird this game is. It's also pretty tough, and I died a lot in this footage because I didn't figure out how to change the difficulty in the dip switch settings until after I was done recording, but that default difficulty setting is brutal, and it's pretty annoying to recover even if it's a million times more forgiving than older STGs. But it feels like everything moves way too fast to react in this game. Honestly, the initial shock of the game's weirdness kinda wears off after a while, but Bakuretsu Breaker is a pretty fun time regardless and definitely deserves a more widespread release on modern platforms. The other Kaneko game I wanted to talk about is Cyvern, the Dragon Weapons, released in 1998. So you play as cyborg dragons, and that's cool. Not much more to say there. I'm not really sure what this game's story is. I couldn't really find any info about it online. I found out about this game because I was looking for arcade shoot-'em-ups to play and saw this game had rave reviews, some calling it a masterpiece and one of the best games in the genre. Yeah, I don't think this game is cracking my top 15, but it's good. My main issue with it is, outside of the mildly unique theme, it doesn't really do anything especially great to take it to that next level. It has good pacing and level design, but it's far from the best I've seen from the genre. It's still a game I'd recommend. It has some of the same features I mentioned Bakuretsu Breaker had, except for there are only 3 characters to choose from now, and while that does include the lack of auto-fire, it is a little more excused here as you have a metered charged attack called Banish that you can pull off if you hold the fire button. Once again, if this game got a home port, it could add auto-fire as a separate button. It's quite tough, but very forgiving, as you can imagine from a game released in 1998. Also, I just felt like mentioning, apparently the game was originally going to be released in Japan with the alternate title of Kiryu, but it seems to have just been released as Cyvern in all regions. It's a good game I recommend checking out, just not a masterpiece. Sadly, I don't think these games will ever see wider re-releases for modern platforms because Kaneko went defunct for unknown reasons sometime in the mid-2000s, and it's completely unknown who owns their IP at this point. So yeah, don't feel too bad about just booting up ROMs of these games on me. Now for the other game I really wanted to talk about. Air Gallet, or Aku Gallet, or
Aku Garrett blows your socks off.
Developed by Gazelle and released by Bon Presto in February of 1996. So, some background. Toaplan was a developer of arcade games, most notably shoot-'em-ups, the most notable of which nowadays is probably Zero Wing, aka the origin of All Your Base Are Belong to Us, from 1984 to 1994, when they went bankrupt. After this, many of their developers left to form other companies, also notable for shoot-'em-ups, like Takumi, notable for their work with Capcom, and the most notable of these successor companies, Cave. But some members also moved to a recently founded company called Gazelle. They ported some of Toaplan's games to the PlayStation and Saturn and created some Sailor Moon arcade games, and that was pretty much it. But they did make one shoot-'em-up, that being this game. It follows a pretty basic plot about fighting off terrorists. I honestly don't have much to say about the gameplay itself. It does have auto-fire unlike the previous 2 games I've showcased, but it's limited and you can shoot faster than it. It's pretty much a continuation of what Toaplan was doing with their shoot-'em-ups before they went bankrupt. This was also pretty much what Takumi and Cave did with their first games, Twin Cobra 2 and Donpachi, both of which released earlier in the same month, November of 1995. Twin Cobra 2 is actually a sequel to Toaplan's Twin Cobra, and had actually started development at Toaplan before it was ceased before their bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Donpachi was a deliberate attempt to try to recapture the magic of Toaplan's titles, but in actuality it's kind of just a weaker retread of Toaplan's last shooter, Batsugan, with a darker vibe. Actually, speaking of Donpachi, it and its sequel, Donpachi, have received home ports before, but they haven't been made officially available in recent years. Presumably because Atlas, who distributed them in arcades, still owns the rights and seemingly hasn't put together any agreements with Cave to release them again. Actually, speaking of Dodonpachi, I have to take a quick tangent and mention the game Dodonpachi 2 B-Storm, the third game in the Donpachi series, which is also another game that has never received any kind of home release. This game has an interesting backstory. Because of the declining popularity of arcade games, Cave was considering throwing in the towel after releasing their game Pro Gear for Capcom. As such, they briefly gave the Dodonpachi license to Taiwanese developer IGS, not to be confused with the other video game company known as IGS who made games like Armadillo. And they made this game and released it on... oh no. It was distributed worldwide by IGS and in Japan by Capcom, and proved to be somewhat of a hit, which convinced Cave to return to making arcade games, and thus they made their own sequel to Dodonpachi afterwards. This game shows a very different direction the Dodonpachi series could have taken, and I must cast a protective barrier before I say this. I like this game way better than the Dodonpachi sequels that Cave would make and prefer the direction they were going in both ambiguously and gameplay wise. I was going to say more here and explain why, but I should probably move on before some of the more ravenous hardcore Cave fans come to shoot. No wait, dodge me. Now, Twin Cobra 2 and Donpachi are good games, but I think Air Gallet is the best of the three Toaplan successors' debut shooters, even if just for how visually stunning the game is. This is legit top 3 best sprite work in any shoot 'em up. Some of the best in any arcade game of the era for that matter. The level of detail here is mind-boggling. I recommend playing it just to look at it. You could just tell Gazelle inherited Toaplan's best artists. Now, it doesn't have the most standout visual motifs, and the most interesting and unique piece of imagery from the game is probably the final boss, which I'm not gonna spoil because I'm recommending this game, but it's still a visual treat. And out of all the games I discuss in this video, it has the best music, hands down. Gameplay wise, it's pretty good, but even if I think it's the best of these Toaplan successors' first games, Toaplan's Batsugun is a pretty tough act to follow, and it doesn't live up to those standards. However, much of Gazelle's staff quit and moved over to work at Cave, and Gazelle ended up shutting down shortly after the game's release, making this the only original shooter they created. It's a shame because I really wonder what they would have done had they had kept making games. Now, as you can imagine, this being a game from an obscure company that folded shortly after it came out, it never received a home port and hasn't received one in the 30 years since its release. In fact, it just turned 30 years old a month ago at the time of me releasing this video. But while I was initially writing a version of the script for this video, and yes, it really takes me a long time to commit to these video ideas and finally decide to go through with making them, it was re-released in arcades. On April 15, 2025, it was re-released for the EXA Arcadia arcade system board as part of the EXA label series. These are special versions of older games, but with features aimed at hardcore players. And if you want to play them, you either have to A, go to Japan, or B, file for bankruptcy. I get that most of the releases for the system are meant solely for the most hardcore players, but even I want to play some of these. So yes, technically this game has seen a re-release, but it's still never been released on a regular home system. I'm not really sure how EXA Arcadia got the rights to release Air Gallet. I mean, this was Gazelle's only original IP, but I really hope whoever owns it can make this game more widely available to people who aren't millionaires. I also really hope they include the EXA label version, but that's never happened before, so I highly doubt it. Anyways, these were just some games I thought were interesting or that I think you should check out. They're not hidden masterpieces that need to get the Earthbound treatment. I'd only give each of them around a 6 or 7. but they're definitely great and interesting games that don't get the attention that they deserve because of their circumstances. If I had to rank them, I'd probably go with Bakuretsu Breaker at the bottom. It's rough, but it's definitely better and more interesting than a lot of other STGs from the time. Then Cyvern. It's not some masterpiece, but it's incredibly solid. And at number 1, I'd put Air Gallet. The presentation kinda bumps it up above Cyvern for me. And I guess because I briefly brought it up, I'd probably slap B-Storm between Cyvern and Air Gallet. Anyways, if you guys can think of any more obscure arcade games that have never received any kind of home release, definitely let me know. If you want to see me talk about more games like this, check out my amazing video game obscurities video. I'm not complimenting myself, that's what it's called. Anyways, huge thanks to my patrons and thank you all for watching.